The marble floors are slick with something dark. In the year 38 AD, the servant stumbles through the corridors of the Palatine Hill Palace in Rome, his sandals leaving crimson footprints behind him. His breath comes in ragged gasps. His hands tremble as he clutches a blood-stained cloth. What he has just witnessed in the emperor's private chambers will haunt him until his dying day. The man who rules the most powerful empire on earth, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, known to history as Caligula, has just done something so disturbing, so unthinkable, that even the hardened palace guards refuse to speak of it. But here's what most history books won't tell you. The shocking acts of madness you think you know about Caligula, the horse he supposedly made a senator, the bridge of boats across the Bay of Naples, those are just the stories that survived. The secrets we're about to reveal are far darker, far more personal, and backed by evidence that historians have spent centuries trying to piece together. These are the 5 secrets that show Caligula wasn't just mad. He was something far more terrifying. Before we begin, ask yourself this. What kind of man looks at absolute power and decides that reality itself is not enough? To understand the monster, we must first meet the boy. Gaius Caesar was born in 12 AD, the third son of Germanicus, Rome's most beloved general, and Agrippina the Elder, a woman whose bloodline connected directly to the divine Augustus himself. His childhood was spent not in marble palaces, but in military camps along the Rhine frontier, where his mother dressed him in miniature soldiers' boots. The troops adored the sight of this tiny child marching among them, and they gave him a nickname that would echo through history: Caligula, Little Boots. But childhood nicknames can become chains. By the time Caligula was 7, the whispers had already begun. His father, Germanicus, young, handsome, victorious, died suddenly in Syria under suspicious circumstances. Ancient sources report that objects associated with curses were found hidden in the walls and floors of his residence. Fragments of human bone, lead tablets inscribed with his name. Someone wanted him dead. The boy watched his mother's face harden with grief and rage. He watched as she accused the Emperor Tiberius himself of orchestrating the murder. He watched as one by one his family was torn apart. His mother was exiled to a barren island where she would starve herself to death. His 2 older brothers were arrested on fabricated charges, one starved in prison, the other driven to suicide. By 31 AD, only Caligula remained alive from Germanicus' sons. Perhaps that was intentional. The Emperor Tiberius, old and paranoid, withdrew to his villa on the island of Capri, a place of dark legends, where he surrounded himself with scholars, astrologers, and, according to some sources, much darker company. He summoned young Caligula to join him there. The boy was 19 years old. For 6 years Caligula lived in that villa, watching Tiberius's every move, learning the mechanics of absolute power, and suppressing any emotion that might betray weakness. Ancient historians record that Caligula never once protested his family's destruction, never wept, never showed anger. He became a perfect mask. One of Tiberius's advisors remarked that Caligula was either the best or worst man ever to serve a master. He was watching, waiting, surviving, and then, in March of 37 AD, the old emperor's breathing became laboured, his pulse weakened. Caligula stood at the bedside along with Naevius Sutorius Macro, the commander of the Praetorian Guard. Some say Tiberius died naturally. Others whisper that Macro smothered him with a pillow while Caligula watched. Either way, when the sun rose the next morning, the 24-year-old grandson of Germanicus was Emperor of Rome. The Senate rejoiced. The people flooded the streets, weeping with joy. Finally, they believed, a return to the Golden Age, a young emperor from a beloved bloodline, untainted by Tiberius's paranoia and cruelty. For 7 months they were right. Caligula abolished treason trials. He recalled exiles. He held spectacular games and distributed money to the citizens. Ancient sources describe him as generous, approachable, and merciful. He even sailed to the islands where his mother and brother had died, personally retrieving their ashes to give them proper burial in Augustus's mausoleum. Rome had never loved an emperor more. And then, in October of 37 AD, Caligula fell violently ill. For days he lay in fever, drifting in and out of consciousness. The entire city held its breath. Citizens made public vows to sacrifice their own lives if only the gods would spare him. One man even pledged to fight, as a gladiator, if Caligula recovered. The gods answered. Caligula survived. But the man who emerged from that sickbed was not the same man who had entered it. Something inside him had broken, or perhaps something had finally been released. Secret number 1. The sister he could not let go. Her name was Drusilla, Caligula's favourite sister. Ancient sources describe her as beautiful, intelligent, and inseparable from her brother since childhood. But the bond between them went far deeper than sibling affection. After Caligula's mysterious illness, he elevated Drusilla to a position no Roman woman had ever held. He granted her the privileges of the Vestal Virgins, sacred, untouchable. He had her name included in the annual oaths of loyalty sworn to the emperor. Coinage was struck bearing her image alongside his own. And then there were the rumours that no senator dared speak aloud. The historian Suetonius, writing decades later, recorded allegations that Caligula and Drusilla had engaged in an incestuous relationship since adolescence. Other sources claim their grandmother once caught them together in an act that left no room for innocent interpretation. But here's what the history books often omit. In June of 38 AD, Drusilla fell ill. For days, Caligula refused to leave her bedside. He dismissed every advisor, every physician who suggested he attend to matters of state. He held her hand as her fever climbed higher, and when she died, something inside the emperor shattered completely. Caligula ordered the entire empire into mourning. All public business ceased. Laughter became a crime. Any citizen caught celebrating, or even conducting normal trade during the mourning period, faced execution. He had Drusilla declared a goddess, divinity granted to a woman while her brother-lover still lived. But it wasn't enough. Guards reported seeing the emperor wandering the palace at night, calling her name. Servants found him standing motionless in her chambers, staring at her empty bed. One source claims he offered a massive reward to anyone who could prove they had seen her spirit and spoken with her. Caligula had already lost his mother, his father, his brothers. Drusilla's death was the final thread connecting him to his humanity. Secret number 2. The man who became a god. After Drusilla's death, Caligula's relationship with reality began to dissolve. Roman emperors had always been declared divine after death. Augustus, Tiberius, they became gods only when they could no longer object. Caligula decided he would not wait. He commissioned statues of himself dressed as Jupiter, Neptune, Apollo, and even Hercules. These weren't merely artistic representations. He demanded they be placed in temples and worshipped with the same rituals as the traditional gods. But that was only the beginning. Caligula constructed a private temple on the Palatine Hill, connected to his palace by a bridge that crossed directly to the Temple of Jupiter. Inside, he placed a life-sized golden statue of himself that was dressed each day in the same clothes he wore. Priests, former senators and respected citizens, were assigned to perform sacrifices before it. Flamingos, peacocks, pheasants, the most expensive, exotic birds available, and he began to speak with the statues of other gods as equals. Witnesses reported seeing him engaged in lengthy conversations with Jupiter's statue in the temple, sometimes arguing, sometimes laughing, sometimes whispering secrets. On one occasion, he reportedly asked Jupiter who was greater, and when the statue remained silent, Caligula threatened to have it thrown into the street. But the most disturbing manifestation came at night. Caligula claimed that Luna, the moon goddess, visited his bedchamber and invited him to share her bed. This wasn't metaphor. Ancient sources record that he would stand on the palace roof during full moons, gesturing and calling out to the lunar disk above. Guards stationed below could hear his voice echoing in the darkness, speaking tenderly to someone they could not see. Was this madness, or something more calculated? Some modern historians argue that Caligula's divine pretensions were political theatre, an attempt to establish absolute authority beyond senatorial challenge. In the eastern provinces of the empire, rulers had claimed divinity for centuries. Perhaps Caligula was simply importing that model to Rome. But those who looked into his eyes weren't so certain. Secret number 3. The palace that heard everything. Paranoia became Caligula's constant companion. This wasn't entirely irrational. His entire family had been destroyed by political conspiracy. and he knew better than anyone how vulnerable an emperor could be. But what Caligula did to protect himself crossed into territory that shocked even Rome's hardened aristocracy. He constructed a network of secret passages throughout the palace, hidden corridors behind walls, concealed doors, listening posts where servants were stationed to record every conversation that occurred in the staterooms. But more disturbing were the interrogations. When Caligula suspected someone of plotting against him, and he always suspected someone, he didn't simply order their arrest. He personally supervised their torture. Ancient sources describe him present in the torture chambers, watching as instruments were applied, asking questions in a calm, curious voice. Suetonius records that Caligula insisted torture be inflicted slowly, in small increments, to prolong the process. His favourite phrase, according to one account, "Make him feel that he is dying," and he often dined while this occurred, eating delicacies, sipping wine, making small talk with dinner guests while screams echoed from adjacent rooms. One senator, invited to dine with the emperor, found himself seated beside Caligula as a man was tortured just beyond a thin curtain. The senator tried to maintain composure, tried to continue eating, tried to pretend he heard nothing. Caligula leaned close and whispered, "That man insulted my sister yesterday. Do you think his punishment is just?" The senator had no choice but to agree. But perhaps the darkest secret of all was what Caligula did to his own mind. Multiple sources reference his severe insomnia. He rarely slept more than 3 hours a night. He would wander the palace corridors, visiting the beds of senators' wives who had been summoned to stay at the palace. Not always for seduction. Sometimes he simply sat at the foot of their beds in the darkness, watching them sleep. One source suggests he envied their ability to find peace in sleep, a peace he could no longer access. His mind, it seems, had become a prison, and he was both the prisoner and the warden. Secret number 4. The bridge that defied the gods. In the summer of 39 AD, Caligula announced a project so audacious, so seemingly impossible, that many believed he had finally lost all connection to sanity. He would build a bridge across the Bay of Baiae, a distance of nearly 2 miles across open water. But this wasn't about engineering. This was about prophecy. Years earlier, the astrologer Thrasyllus had told the Emperor Tiberius that Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. It was meant as an impossibility, a cosmic joke. Caligula would prove the gods themselves wrong. He ordered every available ship in the western Mediterranean to be commandeered and anchored side by side across the bay. Thousands of vessels, merchant ships, cargo ships, fishing boats, all requisitioned by imperial decree. Wooden planks were laid across them, creating a floating roadway. Earth was piled on top. The entire structure was wide enough for 2 chariots to pass. And then Caligula dressed himself in the breastplate of Alexander the Great, a sacred relic looted from Alexandria, and rode across. Ancient sources describe the spectacle. The emperor on horseback, followed by his entire Praetorian guard, crossing 2 miles of water as if it was solid ground. That night, he held a massive banquet on the bridge itself. Torches illuminated the bay. Music echoed across the water. Wine flowed freely. And many of those forced to attend never made it back to shore. Some sources claim that during the festivities, Caligula ordered several guests thrown from the bridge into the dark waters below. Others suggest that the drunken revelry led to accidental drownings as partygoers stumbled off the edges. Either way, the bay claimed its price. But there was a more devastating consequence. By commandeering virtually every merchant vessel in Italy, Caligula had crippled grain shipments to Rome. Within weeks, food prices skyrocketed. Bread became scarce. The population that had once cheered his name now muttered curses in the streets. The bridge was dismantled after only a few days. The ships returned to service, but the damage was done. Caligula had proven he could defy prophecy, but he had also proven he cared nothing for the suffering his whims might cause. Secret number 5. The conspiracy that no one could stop. By January of 41 AD, the palace had become a place of whispers and fear. Caligula had ruled for less than 4 years, but it felt like an eternity to those trapped in his orbit. Senators came to the palace each morning uncertain if they would return home. The emperor's moods had become impossible to predict. A joke that made him laugh one day might earn a death sentence the next, and everyone knew it couldn't continue forever. The conspiracy began quietly, among the Praetorian Guard. Cassius Chaerea, a decorated military officer and tribune, had become a particular target of Caligula's cruel humour. The emperor mocked him constantly, questioning his masculinity, giving him obscene passwords to repeat when requesting entry to the palace. Chaerea endured these humiliations with a soldier's discipline, but beneath the surface, rage was building. He began speaking carefully with other officers, testing loyalties, identifying who else had reached their breaking point. The conspiracy grew slowly, methodically. They had to be certain. One mistake, one betrayal, and they would all die screaming in Caligula's torture chambers. January 24th, 41 AD. The Palatine Games. Caligula was attending theatrical performances in a temporary theatre complex on the Palatine Hill. Around midday, he rose to leave, complaining of indigestion. He moved through a narrow, vaulted passageway beneath the palace, a corridor lined with cold stone, lit by flickering torches. Cassius Chaerea was waiting. The first blow came from behind, a sword driven between Caligula's shoulder blades. The emperor staggered, tried to turn, tried to understand what was happening. He managed to cry out, but the narrow passage muffled the sound. Then the others emerged from the shadows. More than 30 stab wounds. The conspirators didn't stop until they were certain he was dead. Some sources claim they continued stabbing even after he had clearly expired, as if trying to kill not just the man, but the memory of what he had become. Blood pooled on the marble floor, the same marble where servants had once left crimson footprints. But the assassination didn't end with Caligula. The Praetorian Guard, uncertain what would happen next, went on a rampage through the palace. They found Caligula's fourth wife, Caesonia, and their infant daughter, Julia Drusilla. Both were killed. The baby's head was smashed against a mud wall. No trace of Caligula's bloodline would survive. When news of the assassination reached the Senate, there was no universal mourning. Some senators proposed immediately restoring the Roman Republic, ending the Principate forever. Others scrambled to find a suitable replacement emperor, knowing that without one, civil war was inevitable. They found Caligula's uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain in the palace, terrified he would be killed next. The Praetorian Guard declared him emperor before the Senate could act. Democracy's chance died with that declaration. Caligula's body was taken to the gardens of Lamia, where it was hastily cremated. His ashes were buried without ceremony, without the divine honours typically granted to emperors. No temples would be built to his memory. No prayers would be offered in his name. For a man who had declared himself a god, his ending was profoundly mortal. The palace servants who had witnessed his atrocities were sworn to silence. Many of the records from his reign were deliberately destroyed or altered. The Senate issued a decree of damnatio memoriae, damnation of memory, ordering his name chiselled from monuments, his face erased from coins. Rome wanted to forget he had ever existed, but some memories refused to fade. For decades afterward, people claimed to see his ghost wandering the gardens of Lamia, where his remains had been buried. Night watchmen reported sounds of weeping coming from empty palace corridors, and on certain nights, they said, you could still hear screaming from the torture chambers, even though they stood empty. The man was dead, but what he had unleashed, the realization of how utterly corrupting absolute power could be, that survived. 2,000 years later, we're still asking the same question that haunted Rome in the days after Caligula's death. Was he mad from the beginning, hiding his nature until power made concealment unnecessary? Or did something break inside him during that mysterious illness in October of 37 AD? Perhaps the truth is darker still. Perhaps Caligula was exactly what Rome created. A boy who watched his entire family destroyed by the mechanics of power, who learned that trust meant death, who spent 6 years in Tiberius's villa, learning that cruelty was simply the language emperors spoke. When he looked at the vast machinery of empire and saw no constraints, no boundaries, No consequences for a living god. What else could he have become? The palace still stands on the Palatine Hill. Tourists walk through its ruins every day, photographing crumbling walls and fragmented mosaics. But they're walking through corridors where men and women once held their breath, where every footstep might have been their last, where the line between emperor and god, between power and madness, dissolved completely. History remembers Caligula as a monster, but monsters don't appear from nowhere. They're forged in the fires of trauma, shaped by systems that mistake fear for respect, and unleashed when power meets a mind that has already learned the world offers no mercy. Somewhere in the ruins of Rome, the question still echoes: what would you become if the entire world told you that you were a god, and no one had the power to tell you no?